see if I can open up a separate window with the chat and go from there. And
Bob,
feed
your camera's off, Bob.
my camera? Oh, Bob
Bob,
Wallace.
no, not you. Sorry, Bob.
We got too many Roberts on this call.
That's right.
All right. Bill, do you want to say a 10-second prayer before we jump?
Yes, please. Oh, Lord, our Father and our God Most High, we ask you just to wrap yourself around this thing and make it go according to your will. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
You guys, I'll be in the chat, so pay attention.
Give me 1 second. I have Facebook incorrect. I need to fix it.
Okay.
Is something wrong?
Yeah, nope, we're good. All right, you guys, you can hear me right now, but you can't see me. So Baker will start counting us down very shortly.
By the way, hey, Darren, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you doing?
Now, this is going to be very fluid. Everybody should just don't wait for me to call on you. Just talk. I will interrupt sometimes in order to direct things, but I want this to be a very natural kind of easygoing conversation, please.
All right.
Any word from Claudia?
She's going to be in late.
Coming on until about 3:30.
All right, I'm going to the intro now, and after that, we'll have 28 seconds, and I'll count you in.
I'm Bill Ellis, and I have the pleasure this afternoon of presenting the Brinklow election review. For those of you who are not Brinklow members, we're in Ashton, Maryland, and part of the Allegheny East Conference. This is a special program of the Brinklow Social Justice Ministry. Now we have a result finally. It looks like Biden is being declared the winner of the election, but there's more to it than that. The years of this Trump presidency have been years of turmoil and bad blood, years in which the rickety apple cart of American democracy has been overturned and its contents trampled in the street. This election season has been especially troubling with its turmoil and threats, its lawsuits and lies, with its anxieties and uncertainties. And so here we are. We have a distinguished panel to start the discussion for about half of the time together. Then we'll broaden the conversation and take questions from our audience. And we'll tell you how to do that when we get to this. The conversation is going to turn basically around two very simple questions. First of all, what happened and where are we? That's the first question. Second question is, what are we, the Emmanuel-Brinklow Church, going to do about it? Where are we going to go? Where should we be going as a church? So those are the two big questions. Now, let me start out by introducing the panel. First of all, Dr. Herma Percy is a leading political journalist with a significant profile in network radio and television. She's also written many newspaper columns. She is a political scientist who has analyzed elections at all government levels. She's also a deeply experienced election professional and has worked campaigns all over the place. And of special relevance to this conversation, her doctoral dissertation was on the controversial Bush-Gore election of 2000, and we want to go back and revisit that. David Ralph is a distinguished senior attorney who has served in many public roles, most notably as the Baltimore City Attorney, where he was personally responsible for negotiating the consent agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice to reform and restructure the Baltimore Police Department, and that becomes relevant here. He's also been in private practice and now serves as Deputy General Counsel for the Baltimore Gas and Electric Group. Darren Caleb is a sophomore, math major at our beloved Oakwood University. His bio is not so long because of his youth, but he represents the future of us all, and so we should pay close attention to his comments and questions in this conversation. Claudia Allen will be joining us later, and she, of course, is a dedicated social justice advocate, dynamic and rising preacher, and an advanced doctoral student in English, I think, at the University of Maryland. As a preacher, she's especially gifted at relating scripture to today's social justice issues in ways that make those links marvelously clear. Her sermon today, in fact, was a great example of this well-honed skill as she related Daniel 6 to the horror of mass incarceration and with other things. Dr. Robert Wallace is a well-known entrepreneur, speaker, and college instructor, and author of many books. He's a specialist in many aspects of urban economic development. He's just completed an astonishingly successful candidacy for mayor of Baltimore, his beloved hometown. Now, of course, he lost, but he has shared with me that he got 30% of the vote as somebody who was basically coming to this thing anew. So he should have very special comments to contribute to this conversation. And last of all is me. I'm a senior social scientist with experience as a tenured professor in several research universities. I've also served as an R&D executive in industry, and most relevant to this conversation, I've served as a senior researcher and staff member in Congress, and as a U.S. government executive in the Library of Congress and the National Science Foundation. Now, before we go on, let's stop for just a brief word of prayer. Let us prepare our hearts for prayer, please. Thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. And help us to keep this in the front of our minds, in the center of our hearts, as we walk over into this conversation in which we discuss things that are really, really important to your work on this earth. And may everything that we do help to advance your cause. In the mighty name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so here we go. Dr. Percy, could you start us off? Remember, everybody, the principal questions here are what happened and where are we? And then what are we going to do? So if you could just walk us over into where we are, that would be a good thing. Thank you very much.
All right, where we are, so many moving things or aspects to this. But first, let me just say I want to thank the organizers of this very important panel. Dr. Ellis, thank you for putting this together. Thank you to the Brinklow family. And I'm especially happy to be on the panel with David Ralph. Well, I'm happy to be on the panel with all of you, but David Ralph being the attorney on the panel, I am glad to be serving on another panel with him so he can cover me when I start talking about some of these legal issues, because that's where we are right now in the process. With 74,857 votes, the people have spoken. And now we have the people's choice. Joe Biden. But President Trump is saying it's not going to be the people that will decide this election. Trump is saying the courts will decide this election. So while the networks earlier this morning certainly were declaring that Joe Biden is the president, the Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was having a live press conference in Philadelphia with voters saying that they were disenfranchised. And he laid out his claim before America to say that the networks will not declare this election, the courts will, which is unconstitutional, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the Trump's lawyer said that come Monday morning, they will be filing, I can't talk today, a federal lawsuit in Philadelphia that Trump votes were not counted and he was not given a fair vote, which violates civil rights. He said the Trump campaign will be asking for certain remedies, which include equitable remedies, such as they will be asking the court to either set aside those votes or to deny the jurisdiction votes. So what's interesting to me about all this is, since we're now in the litigation phase of the election process, what's been interesting to me is I've actually been poring over the data for the past week about elections, presidential elections. So as Dr. Ellis mentioned, my doctoral dissertation was Bush versus Gore and looking at judicial autonomy in the context of presidential elections. And then over my shoulder, you see that I've since led on to write a book called Will Your Vote Count? So I was poring over my own data actually and looking at presidential elections since 2000 and just looking at every election to this point. And you can see that the states right now that are in the election debacle, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, I realized there's a connection here. All these states have always had problems with voting. They've always had voting irregularities really across the US in at least 25 states. What's interesting about that, however, is that if you've noticed, take a notice that these states that the Trump campaign is actually challenging, these states are not red states in particular with large amount of white voters. He's not challenging South Dakota, Vermont. These are states with a large urban community, large amount of Black and brown people. That's what I'm getting to. So he's challenging Detroit, really. He's challenging Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, North Carolina, in Maricopa County in Arizona. Well, they have a large Hispanic population. So it's just interesting to me that the Trump campaign has realized way before the general election that there will be some voting irregularities because Blacks, minorities, we've always said that in our precincts, the vote is being diluted. So now the Trump campaign is basically exploiting voter suppression, vote dilution of the minority community, but not to protect us, but to use it as a way and a strategy to either do one of two things: wait out the clock so that the state legislators will decide the electors, and I'm getting ready to talk more about that in a minute, or to make sure that the challenges lead to the Supreme Court. Now, why would that strategy be important? Well, because in the Supreme Court and in the state houses, most state houses are Republican majority led. So the strategy for the next few days or weeks, this is the Democratic strategy I want to lay out for you, and this is the Republican strategy I want to lay out for you, okay? So the ground game, the Republicans have two aspects to their game, this strategy. The first is the ground game. On the ground game, they're going to give that public perception that Trump was cheated out of the election, and they're going to have fake citizens, fake concerns. I shouldn't say fake citizens. Okay, they're going to have citizens fake as if they are concerned about your vote, and they're going to protest in the streets as if to say Trump was cheated from the election. We've already seen that for the past few days. That I don't know if you've seen this on television, but please take note. When you see protesters outside the precincts in Detroit, and again, large, urban, Black precincts, they are protesting, saying stop the count or start the count. Those are Trump supporters who were planted there. So that's going to be the ground game, because it's the same ground game that I noted in my book that Bush used in 2000. And it gave the perception that Bush had won the election, because you started to see citizens all across the US marching to say, you know, hey, we have a president. Why do we have so many lawsuits? So the Republicans are started with that ground game of giving that perception. And also they have a part of their ground game, armed militia, right? We know that. We've seen videos, we've heard reports, we've read the reports And we've seen him in the presidential debate saying, Proud Boys stand back and stand by. So we know that they will be taken to the streets. The other aspect of the Republican strategy is what I just mentioned, the lawsuits. And the lawsuits, however, can do one of two things. As I mentioned, it will either play out the clock so that the state legislators would decide, or the courts. Now, let me just quickly explain to you what I mean. So election day is just one point in the process of electing a president, right? Election day. Now the process is really now in the hands of the Electoral College, and there are deadlines, and those deadlines will not change, lawsuits or not. So you should know that most states, the deadline in the state to certify their votes is somewhere in the latter part of November. So, for example, in Pennsylvania and Michigan, they have to certify their votes by November 23rd, and North Carolina by November 24th. And just a fun fact, by the way, Maryland, we certify our votes, though we're not in the debacle. It's just interesting that we certify our votes December 8th, so late in the game, but that's another story. But anyway, so the states have to certify their votes by late November because the Electoral College this year votes December 14th. So all the electors will be meeting December 14th, and that's a hard and fast date. Now, after that, by December 23rd, the certification of all votes by all states must be sent to the president of the Senate and to the archivists by December 23rd. And then by January 6th, Congress will be meeting and voting and giving the official results. So that is the Republican strategy, to either make sure that the Supreme Court gets involved and make the decision, or if the states can't meet that deadline in late November to certify their results, then legally the state legislators would. And as I mentioned, most state houses are Republican led. Now, quickly, the Democratic strategy. I'm very proud of the Democrats. I'm very proud of the Democrats because in 2000, when Gore was challenging Bush because the vote was so close, you know, Gore actually lost Florida by only 537 votes. But Gore was not out front. It was always Bush seeming presidential and talking about his transitional committee and saying, I've won this election. I've been very proud of the Biden campaign because since election day, have you noticed that they've had a press conference just about every day? Within hours after the general election, they've seen presidential, just seem ahead of the game. And then Trump has to play catch up. Trump has to come behind them to have a press conference. So I'm very proud of the fact that they are building a narrative and an image to say we've won, unlike Gore. The other thing that, however, by the way, Biden will be having a press conference tonight at 8 to talk about, you know, him now being declared president and what that entails, the next steps and so on. So again, that's a good example of how he is moving forward like a president, unlike Gore. The final thing I'm going to say about the Democratic strategy is what we're now seeing in probably even in your own home. I'm sure you've got a lot of calls from family and friends rejoicing about the news for Biden, and people have already hit the streets. The Democratic strategy has to include the same ground game like the Trump campaign and take that energy and hit the streets. We need to protest against the Supreme Court accepting any case from the Trump campaign, because the Supreme Court should not be deciding this election. It is unconstitutional, and David Ralph can talk about some of the constitutional principles where the Supreme Court should not be deciding the election. If anything, it should go back to Congress, because Congress is representative of the people. So that is my strongest message today in this panel discussion, is that the Democrats need to be protesting against the Supreme Court accepting any case about this election. It should be the people's choice. Bill, I'll turn it back over to you after that.
All right, that's a good running start, and that was very informative. Counselor, do you want to say a couple of things about this in terms of the potential litigation and all that?
So Dr. Percy said a lot, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I will say this. There are all kinds of legal challenges. It is clear, as Dr. Percy said, that the Trump administration knew, well, they pretty much knew they were going to lose. So they planned all along how they were going to steal the election. And part of that theft was to, when they heard the fact that for their voters to stay home and send in mail-in votes, as opposed to going in person and voting in, because, you know, it was unsafe to do so in terms of the coronavirus. But, you know, if you can, fine. But the preferable thing, the message from the Democratic side, was to stay home and send in your votes by mail. They figured at that point, they knew that they had a plan, and the plan was to say, hey, only the votes that came in person are valid, and then to pose a legal challenge to other votes that were mailed in, either for a number of reasons, being late or otherwise. As Dr. Percy said, there are potential issues with the certifications by the state legislators in terms of the timing of that. I will say this, that while the Supreme Court shouldn't rule on the election, there are issues that could come to the Supreme Court that they could rule on that wouldn't be issues per se of deciding the election, but they could be technical issues regarding constitutional interpretation. As we all know, the Supreme Court currently has nine justices, and that it is tilted to a conservative ideology now because of the 3 appointments that Trump has made. But I just want to suggest this. While these justices certainly have ideology in their thinking and conservative principles, I would think that they would be careful and cautious to make any ruling on an election that could set precedential effects that would hurt other positions that they would want to take. These justices have lifelong tenure. A lot of justices have been appointed by Republican presidents, have turned out to, on legal issues, not necessarily decide those issues one way or the other, just based on the legal issue. So I am, of course, concerned about for example, let me just finish with this. If, for example, this was an issue of direct ideological persuasion, like, for example, abortion, that would definitely affect how they come out with this issue. This, however, is more attenuated than that. It's not. This is more about. It's not necessarily a direct ideological issue. It's more of a general issue of legal interpretation. So, again, I don't know what those people will do, what those justices will do. I don't believe, for a number of reasons, one, they should not be deciding an election, but even if there are issues of constitutional interpretation that they need to decide, I think that they will be very reticent to make rulings that may hurt other decisions that they may want to go a different way under other circumstances. They set precedent.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. Hold on a
Can I
second. Let me ask. Hold on 1 second. Let me just, because I just want to feed off of what David just said. Is there any issue in this that's real, which some analysts have suggested, that the court needs to be concerned about its general credibility as an institution of government, and that may drive some of the decisions in a more correct direction than they would likely do? Is that a real thing in this, do you think?
I do think so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I do think so. Again, this is not a direct ideological decision. This is more of a general principle of constitutional, and most judges, particularly the Supreme Court judges, when it comes to an issue like that, they tend to decide those issues in a way that most of us can argue, yeah, well, okay, I understand why they rule that way. They don't rule those issues. They don't decide those issues in a way that every lawyer in America is like, what? How did they come up with that? That's
Right.
typically not how it goes.
Okay.
Issues where it's more directly tied to an ideology, yeah, they definitely are people and sway with those ideologies.
Okay, thank you very much. Herma, before I come back to you, if you don't mind, let me just get some comments from
I was going to
from
comment on the point that David just made
okay.
and push back on it, actually.
Okay, because I need to get the other folk involved, but please go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say, David, I kind of challenge what you're saying, and that's why I'm glad you're on this panel, because when I did my dissertation, I actually researched enough to see that the justices back in 2000, when they accepted Bush v. Gore, they made a decision, and the argument that they used in that decision to accept the case and to make the decision that they did is quite contrary to the decisions that they made all through their career. And Justice Breyer and Ruth Bader Ginsburg even noted that in their dissenting opinion of the Supreme Court accepting the case. And so that's why I argue, and other researchers, that there's a principle called judicial federalism that our courts need to honor, because they are humans. And so in some cases, and such as one so highly political, it is very difficult for the court to remain autonomous. And when you're talking about looking at certain decisions where the state courts rule in the matter, as they did in Bush v. Gore, it led to the decisions by the Supreme Court deciding the election. David, I know we're going to talk about this for a while.
We could go on with this for a long period of time, but being mindful of the time, we don't have all the time in the world to do all of this. So let's get to Brother Caleb and Dr. Wallace. Either one of you want to talk some about this stuff?
I don't really have a whole lot to say. As Dr. Percy has said a lot, and Uncle David too. But I feel like as a first-time voter, it's kind of weird that I took time to vote, and then it would be something if the Supreme Court came in and ruled the other way, especially if we already won with Biden because we all voted for him. So that's just my 2 cents there.
No, that's not 2 cents, brother. That's a $50 piece. Brother Wallace, you want to say anything?
Yeah, Bill. So I can't. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I cannot speak to the legal parameters of this like David and Dr. Percy can, but I can speak to it in terms of what's happening in our country on a national level and an aggregate level. What we are facing here as a nation and as a country is a backlash. When President Obama was elected in 2008, there was an immediate backlash from white America. And the 8 years that Obama was in office, they did everything they could not all white Americans, but a sizable number, the Trumpers, to stop him and to impede him at all costs. And the reason that Trump was able to come in 2016 and win was that was a reaction, that was a backlash reaction from the right wing part of white America to the fact that America is changing. And I think as I listen to the newscasts talk about the issue, no one wants to talk about that root issue. That is the issue here, folks. The issue is that there's a sizable number of Americans, white Americans primarily, who are uncomfortable with the change that is occurring in America. And that's the response that we get. That's why the Republican Party has now become the party of Trump, because he's the last option they have to voice and to energize their fear about a changing America. So I think that's the underlying issue that I hope that we get a chance, Bill, to touch upon.
No, you opened up the issue. You want to develop a little further? Where do you think we go? Where do you think we go with this?
Well, this is typically what happens in America as it pertains to racial equity. Every time people of color make progress, make one step forward, they get pushed 2 steps backwards. That has been, if you look at the history of America, that has been the situation. So we should not be surprised that there's this Trumpism, which is what it is now. I mean, Trump has taken over the Republican Party, and the Republican Party has allowed that to happen. That's why I ran as an independent in Baltimore City race for mayor, because neither party, as far as I'm concerned, really represents the needs of African Americans in a meaningful way. And so I think that the issue here for our nation to resolve is, how do we become a nation where we remove the inequalities, the institutional inequalities that have existed in America for centuries? How do we finally remove them so that all of us can be Americans on an equal level? And that's not going to be decided by this election.
Yeah, I know that you just ran for mayor in Baltimore. I know you had a bunch of ideas reportedly about what to do in Baltimore. Do you think those things are relevant to the question that you now raised?
I think very much so, Bill. I think that one of the reasons, what part of my frustration is, I feel that the Democratic Party tends to take us for granted, and that the Republican Party tends to ignore us. So we as a people are always stuck in the middle of this battle, and I'm tired of it. And I'm saying to African Americans and people of color, let us stand on our own independent 2 feet and decide what is best for our community. And I think that Biden winning is a good thing. I endorse Biden-Harris ticket as the independent, but I also recognize that our needs historically have not been addressed. And I hope that we can have that discussion in more detail.
Okay, any response to that?
Yeah, first I want to say congratulations, Bob Wallace. You have achieved and accomplished something that is admirable, especially in the Adventist Church. I think more Adventists should consider public service. And so my hat off to you in taking that step. And since you were running in Maryland, you're welcome. Since you were running in Maryland, I think just to make a quick point, because we did have an election here in Maryland, so I think I just want to quickly mention that in Maryland, certain things we need to be mindful of with this election. That in Maryland, we actually approved sports betting. Maryland voters approved that, and just be specific, in Montgomery County, if you recall, for our public affairs segment of our church service online, we talked about some of those ballot questions. Now is a good time to let you know what was approved for those ballot questions that our county has approved, overhauling the county's way of collecting taxes. But even more importantly, voters decided that they wanted 2 more seats on the Montgomery County Council. So we'll now have 2 more representatives on the county council. The 4 at-large seats will remain. And of course, that will affect representation of our members at Brinklow. Just real
okay,
quick.
now if you could please, sorry to interrupt, but if we could please try to make our comments a little bit more economic, so that we can get the questions started very soon. And by the way, those of you who are listening in, we want to start you putting your questions for the panel up in the chat now. So Herma, I'm sorry
I
to
just had one
interrupt, but we
last
want to
point.
hear from some of.
I just had one last sentence, and that is, I think it's a good thing that we see two counties in Maryland that are switching from red to blue. Anne Arundel County voted in the 2016 election for Hillary, and they held to that this time around, voting for Biden, and Frederick County moving from red to blue.
Now,
So, Dr. Ellis,
Yes,
if
sir.
I could just make a couple of points about some of the outstanding legal challenges, because I think it's important, and I'll be brief.
Okay.
So, just want to say, while there are a number of election challenges, there actually have already been a number of challenges put forth by the Trump administration. Those challenges have been fairly impotent because there really is not a lot that makes sense in terms of these legal challenges. So they've been trying because they want to change the public narrative, like Dr. Percy said.
Yes.
These cases are handled at the district court level, and so far the challenges that they've made were things like their officials haven't been able to observe, the counting. Those have been dismissed summarily. So with election laws, and this is the case across in terms of federal election law, those cases are heard immediately. So there isn't the normal wait that you have when you have a normal litigation that takes a long time. So these cases, they brought them and they've been dismissed. The one case that they actually were granted some relief was in Philadelphia. And there they were able to get one of their campaign workers to observe the count from 6 feet as opposed to 20 feet. That's the best that they have. Those issues are not issues. So, if those issues are the issues that they're raising now, that ultimately are seen on appeal, I don't even see the Supreme Court taking those issues. And to Darren's point, the Supreme Court can't decide the election. The Supreme Court can only decide issues of legal violations that are constitutional violations, and so those are the kinds of cases that the Supreme Court actually does interpret, and those have been set by Congress because the Supreme Court scope is actually not set in the Constitution. It's actually determined by Congress.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Darren. Bob Wallace has said, that he doesn't see any of the two major parties meeting the needs of Black people in this country, and so we have to figure out something else to do. What's your thinking along those lines, Darren? Because sooner than you may imagine, you're going to be the person, one of the people who's going to be doing this stuff. That's the reason that you are here. What do you think?
Well, I know for sure Republicans haven't done not even close to enough for us. There's Black people still struggling. There's Black people that are still being put in prison for doing almost nothing. So there's also the Democrats. They've done more, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done. I don't know what to do. I think that I don't know what to. Like I said, I don't know what to do, but I feel like there's all we have to, for us Black people, all we see is like the Republican doing the bad, like really bad things to us. So I feel like as long as they keep doing bad things and we keep supporting the Democrats, there might one day be something that they will do for us. Unfortunately, it will take a while. I don't know what we can do to make them move faster so they can help Black people get jobs, help Black people to get out of the poverty. So we'll see what happens one day.
Well, one of the things is about time with respect to this. We don't have any time anymore. What you've got going on is a pandemic in this country that's killed already a couple 100,000 people, and you've got millions of people who've been infected, and it's been suggested that a lot more than those things have happened here than are in the public record. One of the organizations that watches this stuff has said, this is beyond Black people, has said that if the economic and pandemic crisis continues, then very likely there will be 50 million people in the United States who are going hungry soon,
Sure,
very soon.
sure.
There are people who 1/3 of the population of the United States now, third of the households is behind in their rent or their mortgage payments. As soon as they lift the moratorium on evictions and on foreclosures, it's very likely there are going to be a whole lot of people in the street. So you
Absolutely.
have hunger and homelessness that are going to become serious crises. And indeed, what's that boy's name? Kushner, who's the president's son-in-law and a big-time slumlord in Baltimore and elsewhere, has already filed things that suggest that as soon as the moratorium is lifted, he's gonna put at least 100 renters of their apartments in the street. So you've got a crisis that is right upon us right now, and this has to be
Absolutely.
dealt with. My concern over a whole series, a long period of time, has been that the institutions of this government, as they are now constructed, may not be able to deal with the crisis that we are in. And we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about education, we're talking about violence and racism, and we're talking about all of this stuff. And that's a very serious thing. So Bob, when you raise this question about the two parties are not working, it's beyond that. It's beyond that structure.
Well,
And so
it
we
is.
have to, and so Darren, we do not have, excuse me for just saying, we do not have time anymore. We got to deal with
Agreed.
something right now.
Totally agree, Bill. I totally agree with that, Bill.
Dr.
I mean,
Ellis.
one thing that I have learned from running for mayor of a major city is the issues that are on the ground level that will impact the people of this nation. All the things, Dr. Ellis, that you talked about are the issues happening in Baltimore City and in our urban centers, but not only that, in our rural centers as well. See, what the right wing has done so very well in America is that they have pit working class white folks against working class Black folks. Even though these two groups of people have the same needs and the same requirements, the right wing, they have been successful at using race as a wedge issue between two groups of people who should be working together. And that's one thing that Dr. King tried to do when his war on poverty. He said, look, there are more poor white folks than there are poor Black folks. But if we let race divide us, then we can never come together to address the issue of economic inequality in America. And that's the issue that's happening in Baltimore and most urban centers. It is the economic inequality that is causing all the problems in our cities.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want a piece of this one? Darren, let me get back to you. I don't mean to put you on the spot, brother, but but your reflections and your whole age grades reflections on this are extremely important. We have learned from an article in The Guardian. The Guardian is a London newspaper that has a U.S. edition. We have learned from them that a major feature of this election was young Black voters in terms of turning this thing the way that it has gone. And there are others who have looked at some of the numbers and so on, and they see that. So it's you and your age grade who may have contributed mightily to this. What do you think in terms of what we're going to do with this stuff, man? What do you want to see take place next?
I just want to see us keep going forward, because there's over the past couple of months we've seen racial violence, we've seen the pandemic get stronger. We just want to, I think one thing that we should be able to see is we should make at least a couple steps towards getting being equal with our white counterparts. So I feel like as long as we keep pushing, we'll get there. We still have like a long journey to go, but we're going to work. We're going to keep working there. And then, as you said earlier, my generation, we are the future. So there's my bad. We are the future. So as long as we keep working, we will get there one day.
Well, I started out saying that you were the future, but really the last thing I said is you are the now.
That's right. You are the now. Hey, Bill, can I respond to that, Bill, for a second?
Yeah, please.
So, Bill, when I was running for mayor of Baltimore, it was in the midst of the George Floyd protests. And so I was out there with these young people marching in Baltimore. And I may have been the oldest guy out there, I don't know. But it was a very diverse group, but it was heavily Black and brown kids. And the message I left for them is this. I said, protesting is great. Anger is appropriate. All right. And this is good that we are exercising our right to protest and to march. But at the end of the day, somebody has to sit down and write a check to make stuff happen. And so we cannot just protest and show our anger and leave it at that. So I'm telling Darren and the whole Z generation and even millennials, you can't just protest and stop there. My suggestion as mayor and as a path forward was to use this energy to develop an economic platform where you could create businesses and create wealth so that you have resources to fight this battle. Our problem is we don't have the economic resources historically to fight this battle. And so we end up being at the mercy of the powerful who have the economic muscle to do what they want to do. And so I come back, Bill, back to my point. That is an economic reality here that we need to focus on as a people. And I hope that Biden and Mr. Harris, that they focus, because there's no way this man or this woman would be a president and vice president-elect were it not for African Americans, especially African American women. So when he puts together his cabinet, I would expect to see African American sisters up in there in powerful positions, and African Americans playing a role and an agenda that responds to the economic reality or economic inequality that Black Americans still face today. Right.
Okay. Anybody else on this? Let me move on to another question. See, this stuff that we're talking about now is not easily done in a half an hour, something like this. We have to get into this and work it, right?
Agreed.
Not just in terms of talking, and that's the reason why we come to the second big question: what should our church do? But I want to go back to you, Darren, because in many ways you're the most important person on this panel. Your reflections are really going to be very important for us. Now, you've heard some of this stuff out here, right? What we encourage you and your whole age grade to do, and those who are a little older, as Dr. Wallace has suggested, is to start thinking about stuff that you want to take place, concrete things, right? Let's start with something very simple. How about eliminating the cost of college in public institutions? Germany in 2015 eliminated tuition and fee. I don't think they eliminated the fees. They eliminated tuition in all public institutions of higher learning in the country, right? So it's not as though stuff like this cannot be done. That ought to be of interest to you, because what happens now with young people like you coming out of college, they the average indebtedness of a graduate of a 4-year college in the program in the United States is now more than $30,000. And what that means is that with limited employment, you got a problem. You will have a problem, with employment, with setting up a household of your own, with buying a car, with advancing your life economically. So that's one thing that occurred to me, and I'm sure everybody in your age grade would salute that. But can you think of other things?
College for sure is a big one, because if people can't afford college, that means that they can't get jobs, and if they can't get jobs, they're not going to be able to work and make money, and then they're still going to stay poor. On a couple other things, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's okay. It's all right for right now.
Okay.
But you see what we're dealing with, which is an emergency. So I would encourage you and all of your partners that you know, right, to start in our church and elsewhere, to start thinking about concretely what you would like the future to look like. Because sooner than you can imagine, you're going to be the person that's doing it. You are going to be the people that are doing this stuff. Now, I hadn't meant to talk that much about any aspect of this.
So Bill, Bill, can I share something with the young man?
Yes.
So Bill, to your point, and I think he needs to hear this, is that when they tell you So Darren, when you say, well, we want, free tuition, or we want, healthcare, whatever, if they tell you that we can't afford it, you tell them this: we as a nation, we've just spent $3 trillion to save this economy. $3 trillion, 3 times more than what Obama got to save the economy in 2008, 2009. So that tells me that we as a nation, whenever we decide is important, we can find the money to pay for it. And so I just want to say, Darren, that as you think of these bold ideas, be bold, son. Be bold. And be bold and be courageous in what you want and what you're asking for. And what you're asking for has to be able to change the structural inequalities that you're going to face as a man of color and as a younger generation person. But we as a nation, we can pay for whatever we think is important, right? And if I learned nothing else from this COVID-19 experience, is that our government can print money whenever it thinks it's important to print more money.
Herman, do you want a piece of this? And then I'm going to come to you, Counselor.
I'll pass.
No comments? I'm surprised that you must have.
Well, you said before the panel, we can jump in and not have to wait for you to ask us to speak. And maybe I was talking too much, so I'm just waiting for you to.
No. Your contribution's been very sound. It's just that you and David haven't said anything for a while. You want a piece of this, David? That's the end of it right there.
Well, look, this is
okay. Let's go.
The question is a profound and complicated question. And,
it is that.
And the point is, I will say this: when we talk, a lot of times we talk about them as if there is this other them out there. When we talk about either party, Democrat, Republican, Independent Party, we talk about them. We have changed the game. We need to be the ones, it's us, and we need to get in there and make, in these key positions to make decisions, to be be at the decision table, making decisions, and not just expect that somebody else will do it. And what I would like to see from young folks, as Bob said, look, I've been out there with young people protesting, and then I pull them aside and I say, well, all right, what now? And they're like, what do you mean? So is it just that you came out here to yell and scream and make noise? You got to also have a plan of action, is what Bob was saying, and I agree with it. Protest is meant to bring attention to issues. But then once you've brought attention to an issue, you do need to do some action. So for example, with what's going on now, Republicans are running around there trying to change the narrative by protesting. I think it's perfectly fine and appropriate for us to be celebrating in mass about an election that we believe was appropriate. Sitting back at this time, I think, would be a mistake. That was part of the mistake in the Bush v. Gore situation. As Dr. Percy talked about, the Republicans were out talking about Bush as the president. Democrats were fairly quiet. So we should be acting as if, no, this is the president-elect and moving forward. So protest is important, and bringing attention to issues are important, but there also needs to be a plan of action. There needs to be action.
Absolutely. Counselor, we got a couple of questions up in the chat now. One of them, I think, probably belongs to you. Let me just read it. It says, what's the point? And I think we go back to something you may have said earlier. What's the point of casting our vote and letting our voices be heard through the vote if the courts can overturn that?
Again, we have to be a little more definitive. That's a very great question, first of all, but it's a broad question. It's a general question. You know, what is being overturned? So, for example, if you casted your vote and like in 2000, where there was issues with, you know, whether it was a hanging Chad or or not. Hey, that's something I can understand. You know, frustration with that. But there are rules in terms of voting. What is appropriate vote and what's not appropriate vote? If it's an appropriate vote, then there really isn't, you know, there really isn't much to overturn. There's no legal issue for a court to overturn. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, if the long established, which it is, practice, not practice, but voting law in the state, because these elections are like several different mini elections. It's not really one national election.
Right.
All these jurisdictions have different laws that control them. Pennsylvania's law has long time been that votes that are postmarked by November 3rd can be counted. If they come in on the 6th or whatever date, doesn't matter. That's the long-standing law. So a court coming in after that is not an adjudicator of fact. So if the fact is that that's been the law, it's not the court's place to really, the court has no ability to overturn that. So what I'm trying to say is, I know there's a lot of anxiety about the validity of votes. If your vote is valid, if you've done the things that you've done, then those things should be counted as a vote. The question comes in where, and this is where Republicans have really done a good job in terms of misinformation and confusion, in terms of what is a valid vote, trying to change the rules, make it confusing for people to know what is a proper thing to do. Comes in because people can be confused and make mistakes in terms of voting, and those are things that could be discounted.
Okay, let me just make one quick comment about voting, and then I think the next question is yours, Dr. Percy. But there are two things about voting. People say, you know, I'm just one person, but my vote doesn't count, right? 2 points. Number one, you always vote whether you cast a ballot or not.
Sure.
And if you don't vote, you vote for whatever the outcome is.
Right.
So you should be aware of that. For example, this is a generalization now. If you did not vote in 2016 and could have voted, then you voted for Trump. The second point is this: if your vote doesn't count, why are they trying to take it away from you? Those are two very simple things. Now, Dr. Percy, let me read you this question, this other question. What are some thoughts and opinions on court packing? Should Biden go ahead and go forth? Will it not be a good look, a good note on his administration? Wouldn't it be a good thing for his administration to have done that? What do you think about the court packing issue?
I think court packing is an issue that was considered by previous presidents. I think it was Roosevelt who tried to pack the courts. I can't debate right now about whether or not it would be good for the Biden administration to consider doing it. Perhaps David would be a better person to talk about this kind of legal issues. I can more talk about it from the political side of things, and it's certainly something that politically Democrats will push because of the 6-3 justices that we now have in the Supreme Court. And there's the fear of Roe versus Wade being overturned. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people, white evangelicals, supported Trump. You know, they went out in droves to vote him in because he made a promise, and it was promise made, promise kept. And they felt like, you know, he delivered. And so because of that, we know, I would believe that there will be a case that will be headed towards the Supreme Court to make a decision on that. So Democrats are going to have to come up with a game plan in how to make sure that they safeguard the democratic platform.
Okay. Counselor, you want to talk about that?
Dr. Ellis, could I say something on that real quick?
Of course, of course.
I'm not an attorney. I'm just a lowly engineer. But I will tell you something.
Hold on a second, brother. Time out. a lowly engineer.
A lowly engineer. Well, Bill.
Anytime somebody like you starts talking about how lowly they are, I reach and put my hand on my money.
No, I'm good, Bill. But
Bill, go ahead with it. Go ahead with it, Bob.
What I want to say is that the answer to the question, in my mind, is it's not either or, it's both and. See, one of the things that happens is that when Republicans get into power, they don't care about what Democrats think. They implement their agenda and they do it aggressively. I think that Democrats need to do the same thing and stop apologizing for your agenda. When you are in a position to implement your agenda, that's what you should do. And I always get frustrated when I hear the Democrats, when they get into power, and they just kind of are like soft and weak, whereas the Republicans are forceful and strong. So don't apologize for the Democratic agenda, implement it when you have the power to do so. And I get concerned that when I hear that, because the Republicans are very forceful in how they implement their agenda, where Democrats tend to back away and get soft on that. I'm concerned.
Okay, yes, sir.
Yeah, so this is why elections are important. It's not just the person at the top of the ticket. It's important when you look at everybody throughout the whole ballot, because the president of the United States has nothing to do with the scope of the Supreme Court. Remember, there are three co-equal branches of government. Congress is the entity that sets the scope of the Supreme Court, not the president of the United States. The president gets to nominate for vacancies to the Supreme Court. So it doesn't, whoever the president is alone doesn't really matter. It also matters who's in the House of Representatives and who's in the Senate, because that's so right now, Supreme Court justices have a lifetime tenure. Congress could change that. Congress institutes that. The Constitution says nothing about these things. The Constitution doesn't say how long the Supreme Court justices serve, how many Supreme Court justices there should be. There have been, different numbers of Supreme Court justices in the past. So, I mean, certainly in the 20th century, there's been 9, but in the past, there's been less. So that's a congressional act, not a presidential act. This is why elections from top to bottom, not just the president, but looking at all the representatives, those are equally important. So even in the off year, meaning the non-presidential election years, young people and everybody else need to get out and vote for their representatives. Just don't vote in presidential elections.
All right. Claudia, welcome. It's good to have you here. It's going to be kind of awkward to catch you up, so just try to listen along.
Do that, yeah.
Try to listen on. We all want to thank you for the wonderful sermon today. That was a good thing.
Praise the Lord.
And entirely relevant to this. Let's turn now to the second large question, and that is what should we be doing as a church? Okay, we walked around in these issues some, and we talked about the results of the election and so on. And Bob has correctly said, we need to really be thinking about what this administration should do. And Irma said, well, what really we need to get in the street, and we need to do something in order to make this administration do what it's supposed to do and stuff like that, right? Now, what are we as a church going to do? What do you think? Should we change anything in terms of the way we do it? Should we expand the things that we are doing? Should we join with others to do some of these things? What do you think?
Can I start, Bill, for
Of
answering that
course.
question? And I use as an example, Bill. I use it as an example in America, the civil rights movement, right? The civil rights movement in America was launched and was run through the Black church, right? Now, it may not have included
Yes,
the
yes.
Adventist church, but the civil rights movement.
He's having some audio problems.
Bob, we're not hearing you clearly now.
If
He
we,
said
if we-
he said at first he's in the mountains of
Yeah.
New England, and so he might have these
Hey,
problems.
Bill, can you hear now?
No, it's still not clear, Bob.
Okay. All right. I'll come back.
Try it now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure how much you heard. What I was suggesting is that the civil rights movement in America was designed, launched, and executed through the Black church. And I think that any movement in America,
I'm hearing him.
It's breaking up now. I think
especially as pertains to Black and brown people, happen. I think that okay, go ahead.
The faith that basically what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is that the faith community, the Black faith community, should be active in terms of doing this stuff now.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a response to that?
Yeah, Bill, can I jump in here? Because I'm getting messages in the chat to jump in. I think we need to be more civically engaged. Politics is not just every 4 years. And that is when most of us come out to protest, to scream, talk and talk and talk. But politics it's every day, right? Because every time you wake up, the moment you wake up, there is some political decision that is affecting your day. So we need to be more civically engaged. And to break that down even more, what I mean is to be specific. We need to be there need to be more Bob Wallaces out there getting engaged, more Adventists need to get out there. But we also need to fund campaigns. Black people.
My Lord, Herma talking good right now. Yes, go ahead.
We need to give. We know money rules the world, and politicians, they respond to those who are funding their campaign. And just in case there's any kind of confusion, it doesn't mean that you have to give thousands of dollars. Just make a commitment to give $10, $20 a week to a campaign. That consistency, and I think if more of us as a block were to give, we can make a difference. The second thing we need to do is more of us need to show up at city council meetings and county council meetings. I can't tell you how many times I've been in county council meetings and even city council meetings in Como Park. I see the same people fighting and arguing with city council members, arguing with city council members about minor things, but the city council members, they're responsive because they know those same people will be coming back next week. So let me just get to that issue. So more of us need to show up and make our faces and our values and our issues known to politicians. And then the final thing that we need to do is, I think as younger people, we need to get involved. Well, not just younger people. You know, the election day itself, more of us need to be poll workers, poll watchers. Where are we? And then for our youth, there's even in this county something called the Future Vote Program, where our youth can earn service credits and money, where they can help out with the primaries and with early voting. More of us need to be involved with what is going on in our political system, rather than just leaving it up to those who run, who often don't look like us.
All right, let me make just 2 quick points. With respect to all the money that's spent on government stuff in the United States, just a little more than half of it is spent from the federal government. Almost a half of it is spent at the state and local level. At the state and local level are most of the issues that vitally concern us, such as economic community development, education, the police, a lot of healthcare stuff, some welfare stuff, the streets and roads and all kind of stuff like that. So you are right. There was a training that was done by the AEC on last Sunday for lobbyists. And I can't remember that woman's name. You would know her. Joe, what's her name? but she did the training, and it was focused on getting Adventists in our churches to become advocates at the state and local level for issues that are of concern to us. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is about money. Well, let me just finish this. The second thing is about money and politics.
No,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you just asked for her name, so I was giving you her name, St. George.
Yeah, Joe St. George. That's right. The second thing is that money, you know, in the 1950s with the advent of television, the whole structure of the way in which campaigns were done changed in the United States. A whole bunch of money goes into television now. But what people like the so-called squad in the House of Representatives and other insurgent candidacies, maybe Bob's too, learned was that you don't have to have a whole lot of money if you got a whole lot of people. And the people, you put an army in the street and they go door to door or computer to computer these days or whatever it is. And that can finesse the need for a whole bunch of money. You're right, we need some money, that's for sure. But I just wanted to make those 2 points. Anybody else want to say something about this?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I said before, that's what I meant. What Dr. Percy said much more eloquently than I did for Darren, is that it's not just, yes, your money is important, but it's also your time and not just on election day, your participation, your understanding, getting to understand your political process. You know, learning about that. You know, it amazes me how much people just don't even know about what the process is. They don't even know who their local representative is. You know, these are people that you pay their salary. So you should be, you know, getting involved. And when you get involved, you might realize that, hey, there are things, you have ideas too. And you might realize that you might have an interest in assisting in some way. It doesn't have to be as a candidate. I, for years, you know, assisted in advising a number of government officials. I had no desire to run for office myself, but you can affect change in many different ways.
That's absolutely right. I have a couple of questions in the chat now. Let's go back a bit. The first one is when Trump talks about illegal votes and legal votes, how much attention should we be paying to the issue of the Electoral College, given the history of Black people being considered 3/5 of a person? Yes.
Oh boy. Yeah, I would say that when it comes to our voting rights, the Voting Rights Act did not provide full protection or did not eliminate disenfranchisement for Blacks, I should say. And actually, this is the second presidential election that we've had without the protection of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was decimated by the Supreme Court 7 years ago, and Congress still has not restored it. You know, the interesting thing about our vote.
Herman, you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear now? I guess we're having a technology problem.
There it is. Right.
I was saying that. Okay, I was saying historically, when you consider our history in voting, you know, it started off where we had problems just casting our ballot with the poll taxes and literacy tests. But I want you to realize there's a different phenomenon that's going here on now. And that is not just in being able to cast a ballot. Now the problem is to have those ballots counted. So we've gone from a problem with casting our ballots being prevented to now a problem with our ballots being counted once we voted, because there was a recent study out of Florida, one of the universities, where they found that depending on the precinct, and it's usually precincts where Black and brown people live, we stand at a higher rejection rate of our ballots. We saw that in particular in 2018 when Blacks started using mail-in voting, that our votes was rejecting at a higher rate. So in Gwinnett County, which right now is a part of the election debacle, in 2018, we found that white voters, their ballots were rejected at a rate of 2%, but for Black voters, it was rejected at a rate of 8%.
Right.
So, you know, activists have been trying to tell Black people outside of the coronavirus times, however, that it really is best for us to vote in person just to reduce the rate of the rejection of our ballots.
Okay, thank you very much. I got one more question, then I want to get back to this major question about what the church should be doing. This question is, does giving, this is back to the money, does giving to a particular campaign make it look like we have allegiance to that specific party?
Could you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. It's just kind of a sneaky question. Does giving to a particular campaign make it look like we have allegiance to that specific party? If you give it to a particular candidate, does that make it look like we are supporting the party in general? That's the way I take the question. What do you think?
This might be controversial, but I don't see what the problem is with supporting a party. Now, clearly, we as Adventists have had this conversation umpteen thousand times, right? There's this teaching that Ellen White does not support the idea of you voting by party, but instead encourages you to vote by issue, vote by candidate, which is absolutely true. However, the fact of the matter is that we quite frankly are a two-party system. There is certainly other parties, but we are primarily a two-party system. So your support of a candidate is directly a support of a party. Whoever you voted for in this particular round of elections, you either supported the Republican Party or you supported the Democratic Party. And so I think that, we should not kind of get locked in to these labels and these understandings, but instead determine, is there a candidate that is going to come into office and make the necessary changes that, I feel like are needed for my community? Is that candidate Democratic? Okay. So if I give to that candidate, yes, I am invariably giving to the Democratic Party as well. Does that mean that I agree with absolutely everything that the Democratic Party or even that individual candidate will do in office? No. But instead it means that I, as an informed citizen, am going to participate and make myself available to actually holding this particular individual accountable, right? So just like Dr. Percy and Attorney David Ralph were talking about earlier, if I'm not in the local meetings, if I am not in the spaces and places where I can make my voice heard and say XYZ needs to happen, or hey, I put you in office to do XYZ and you haven't done XYZ, then that is where the problem comes. The concern is not so much, oh man, my money is going to the Democrats. No, the concern is my money is going to the candidate that is going to do the work. And if I am committed to helping to fund that candidate, I'm more than likely am also committed to being in the meetings and spaces to where I can help hold that candidate accountable.
Okay, anybody else want to say something about this?
Yes.
We only got about 12 minutes left.
Just one caution. I just needed one. I agree with Claudia, but there's just one caution. The question could be interpreted this way: as a church, we can't support a particular candidate because we are a nonprofit, not-for-profit organization. So we cannot, as an organization, support a candidate. We would lose our status, certainly our tax status, tax exempt status in doing so.
But we can talk. I'm sorry, Bob, please.
Hey, Bill, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Now, okay, so we need to take to your question. We need to take a lesson from the white evangelicals, because they are very focused on who they support and who they get behind. And so I think we as Christians, as African-American Christians, as Adventist Christians, we need to be very intentional about, as the sister said, supporting people who support our agenda. So whether they're Republican or Democrat or independent, it doesn't matter. I know personally, I've written checks to Republicans, I've written checks for Democrats and independents. I vote for the person, not the party. And I think if we do that, I think we'll be safe.
Absolutely.
Okay, anybody else want a piece of this? Well, all right, well, let's go back to the major question that about what we should be doing as a church. Okay, now David has pointed out that there are limitations of what we can do as a church, but we can, as individuals in that church, in groups of individuals, we can go and do whatever, so long as it doesn't involve the corporation. Is that right? Okay. So what should we be doing then?
I mean, I think Dr. Percy, really kind of hit the nail on the head with this one earlier. The only thing that I would probably add to it is I think that Adventists have a tendency to feel like we have to come out and create something new. And so we want to create our own policing initiative, and then we're going to create our own food desert initiative and create our own. And there's a lack of acknowledgement and knowledge around the organizations, entities, initiatives that already exist. So I think that, what I would try to encourage is to see what are the issues and problems within our community. What are the initiatives and organizations that are already in existence to help address those issues and concerns? How can we partner with them in that work to continue that work so that we're not starting things all the way over again? But if we are in alignment, if we can be in alignment with an organization, not everyone, but if our values and principles line up with an organization, can we work with and help them to accomplish the same goal? And if there so happens to be a void or a vacancy within our community, and we're noticing that there is no organization or there is no initiative around a particular issue, then how can we take up that charge and create whatever is necessary to address that issue? I think that Brinklow does a fantastic job of doing that already. I think, we've, received awards and the like because you guys do such a great job of identifying or have identified here was a lack, and we met that lack, during COVID and in the feeding of so many families.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you for that. What else?
Hey, Bill, this is Bob again. I would add, we got to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. One thing I have learned in running for mayor of a major city is that if you don't have the economic power to fight, you are dead in the water. And what I have learned in this experience is that the African American community is in economic jeopardy. We do not have the economic resources, or we're not using them to fight this battle. And so as I have stood out there to fight this battle against the machine, I tell you something, if I didn't have my own resources to fight this battle and then economic resources from other communities, I would never been able to fight it. So I'm telling us that as a people and as a church, we have got to be smarter about mobilizing our capital to help us achieve the agenda that we're trying to achieve. And right now we are economically frail. We are frail as a people economically, and it's going to put us in a bad position as this country begins to expand. And as more groups come to this country to compete economically, we've got to be able to compete better economically than we are right now.
Bill, can I add to that?
Of course.
I would say that we need to join coalitions. There are plenty of organizations that exist that fight every day for the things that we value and things that we believe are biblical principles. And we also need to join protest movements. We could start a protest movement right here in Silver Spring. I mean, there's a protest movement every other Saturday right here in Silver Spring, close to the church on University Boulevard, the high school lawn. You have a bunch of people with picket signs that say Black Lives Matter. But the reality is that we must face is that within the church, we still have people who don't believe that we should vote. We still have people who believe that as Adventists, we should be involved in politics. We have people right now who believe that we shouldn't even be having this conversation on the Sabbath. And we have to face that that's a part of the challenge with getting our members everyone to be on board with the importance of getting involved and fulfilling their civic duty.
Well, one of the positions that could be taken with respect to that is we don't need everybody. It doesn't have to be the church's, corporate move to do this stuff. It has to be people inside the church, and we don't have to wait until everybody signs up for us to do this. Right?
Agreed.
Absolutely.
That's
Agreed.
basically the implication of what David said.
That's a good
And
point.
that's a very good point. Now, let me just, I have not been a Seventh-day Adventist my whole life. I was a member and a pastor in another denomination for some years and stuff like that. I've only been an Adventist for 20 years, but it strikes me that really this thing is hermetically sealed. Everything that you need is in here. You've got education for your kids from this to that. You've got all these groups of people. You have all these people are interrelated and stuff. And lots of people look outside and they say, nah, we don't want to be bothered with any of that. So there's a cultural thing in here that limits what you just suggested, Herma. It really is. But that doesn't mean we need to stop. And that doesn't mean it can't be overcome, or at least finessed.
Right.
That's such a great point, Dr. Ellis. And I think that's why education is so important. That's why these conversations are so important, because we have to literally change and shift the culture of Adventism around social justice and political and civic engagement. And until we can actually get people to become comfortable in seeing that there is life outside of the Adventist bubble, because you're right. Why would I care about, I live in PG County. So on my ballot this year, I needed to say whether or not I wanted to approve gambling in the state of Maryland and how that money was going to be used supposedly for public education. If I don't have a kid in public education, then I might approach that ballot question from the standpoint of, well, I don't like gambling, so I'm not so there are a number of things that we have a tendency to do because it's like, if it does not affect me directly, then I don't have to be engaged with it, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's a job. And so because of that, I think that is a hurdle that we have to kind of climb. And I think that if we just talk about these things more, and if we encourage people to kind of intentionally reach outside of the bubble, and like everyone has been saying, build relationships with organizations, entities, and individuals outside of the bubble, then I think we would be able to accomplish what we fundamentally believe, in scripture, as well as, within our own individual principles and values.
All right,
Bill,
yeah, just make it quick because we're going to have to close this up very shortly, Bob.
Bill, can I give you a real quick case study? When I was contemplating running for mayor of Baltimore City, every single Adventist sister and brother that I asked if I should do it, they said no. Every single one said no. Everyone else said yes. Okay, so it points to the cultural.
Hey Bob, I didn't tell you no.
That's true. That's true, David. That's true, David. You're right. I got one exception.
Hold up now.
Good point, David. But there was an overwhelming number that said no, Bill. So I'm just saying, culturally, we have to challenge ourselves, and because God will call us, each of us, to do something that does not make sense on paper, and we got to decide if we're going to be obedient or not.
Okay, very quickly. Let me just take 30 seconds. Every person gets to say a little bit about what we need to do to prepare the next generation. That is, Darren and his associates. What do we need to do to prepare the next generation to be active in these ways in politics? Let's start with you, Herma. Now let's just do 30 seconds, everybody. Okay.
Okay, and just to ask you real quick, are we going to talk about the two things that's affecting the lame duck session? It affects our
yes,
members.
okay, all right. Let's okay. Why don't you said you wanted to talk about that earlier offline, so let's just talk about that very briefly, please. There's a question about what we do between now and the 20th of January.
That's a great question.
Well, it's really what Trump is doing. It's not what we are doing, but it's really what Trump is doing in the lame duck session, because right after the general election on Tuesday, the following day, the president has put out an executive order against civil service, and I know we have some in our church, but he has put out an executive order against civil service, and he plans to create a new class of civil service employees. So in the next month, the president is going to put out a new schedule classifying career civil service. And of course, that means that people like Dr. Fauci can be fired. The other thing that he's doing, Congressman Frank Pallone, who chairs the House Energy and Commerce Committee, they had a press conference, he and Nancy Pelosi, and he talked about the other thing that the president has done since the election day last week is that he is now
Okay,
that any
I'm sorry.
regulation that has been around for 10 years,
Right.
if you can justify it, you can. Otherwise, it will be sunset, and that can affect our COVID trial.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. We basically got 1 minute left. And so we're not going to get to do the 30-second drill. But one of the things I hope everybody here will think about is that what do we need to do to engage the next generation, represented by Darren and his associates, to become politically active? It's going to take more than one generation to do this. We've learned that.
Do you mind if I speak on that real quick?
Earlier, we go back. Okay, here we go. Quickly, Claudia, do you want to pray us out of this in about 20 seconds?
Sure, no problem. Heavenly Father God, we are so grateful to you for the time that we could come together and to come to a greater understanding of our nation and how our systems and government work and operate, and also discuss our place within all of that. We are grateful to you for being in the midst of our election season. And we ask, Lord, that you continue to be in the midst of that as it continues to be solidified. We also ask, Lord, that you be with President Trump and others who might be seeking to act out in a variety of ways due to their frustration about particular decisions. And we just ask for peace in our country. And we ask, God, that you give us wisdom, discernment, and understanding on how to move forward in our communities. It's in Jesus' name I pray this. Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.